Hello, I'm Bill Tro, a consultant working with the South Dakota DOT and others on the context-sensitive corridor study. For this portion of the meeting, we're going to turn our attention to the US 14A corridor from US 85 to Savoy, a distance of just over 5 miles. In phase 1 of the study, each of the corridors were characterized based on their current or desired function in the network. The 14A corridor was identified as a destination access corridor, in that its primary functions are to connect recreational and residential uses along the route or uses gaining access through the route, while also considering a key reason people travel the road is to experience viewing the surrounding environment. Actions proposed in this phase of the study reflect needs identified in earlier stages through input gathered at public meetings, working with DOT staff, and discussion with agencies that have interests along the corridor. Needs identified included adding shoulder width, improving the roadside embankment and slopes at the creek, correcting some tight horizontal curves to reduce crashes, and considering additional pullouts and parking improvements along the corridor. Actions addressed in the study support the following needs. First, design improvements. For rural highways carrying volumes that US 14A carries, the South Dakota DOT prefers a 10-foot buffer or clear zone outside the travel lane. A roadway shoulder of 5 feet is included in the clear zone. Within the environment surrounding US 14A, which includes features such as Spearfish Creek or steep terrain that limit the right-of-way width, there are conflicts to providing the buffer and shoulder width. Thus, several concepts to narrow the overall roadway width where restrictions exist can be incorporated into the planning, including adding guardrail or retaining wall to the creek side to replace the clear zone buffer, or providing a narrower 3-foot shoulder, which is allowed, or narrowing the clear zone to 7 feet. Improvements considered in the southern portion of US 14A and Spearfish Canyon are consistent with those implemented several years ago in the segment to the north of Savoy to Spearfish. The product of this stage in the study will be a consistent shoulder width concept, as mixing alternatives between the 3 and 5 feet create driver expectancy concerns that are to be avoided. We do not want drivers thinking there is 5 feet of shoulder available when constraints in the area limit the width to 3 feet. At this planning stage, the potential adjacent impacts of accommodating the 5-foot shoulder and 10-foot clear buffer are characterized along with the narrower 3-foot shoulder while retaining a 10-foot clear zone alternative. The option of narrowing the clear zone may be addressed in future design work as needed. Second, Spearfish Creek eroding the road. There are several locations along the road where Spearfish Creek is close enough to erode areas just outside the limited shoulder that currently exists. These areas represent the most critical portions of the corridor to address, as potential safety issues are created and there are added maintenance costs to keep the creek from undercutting the road. South Dakota DOT is looking at options to address protecting both the creek and armoring the roadway bed. Alternatives to address erosion include lining the base of the slopes with riprap and replacing the 5-foot shoulder within the 10-foot clear zone combination with guardrail and or a retaining wall and a more limited shoulder which narrows the roadway cross-section. A third area of action was the observed higher crash areas. Between Elmore Road and Shone Lane, elevated number of crashes have been observed relative to the rest of the corridor, including a fatality. Most of the crashes involved vehicles, including motorcycles, that ran off the road, which are crashes that can be corrected by changing the roadway design. Along the segments where more crashes have occurred, there are 2 curves that have reduced speed warning signs, and these curve areas have been the focus of improvement review. The goal is to add shoulder width to the curves, reducing the crash hazard while balancing the cost and potential for impacts to the adjacent properties on the creek. For each of the identified needs, we have developed improvement alternatives that balance meeting the need with the level of impact to the adjacent environment and with cost. Through this next section of the meeting, we'll be focusing on our findings for the review of each of the alternatives studied. The 5-mile corridor has been highlighted here based on those areas where accommodating a 5-foot shoulder, 10-foot clear zone buffer is reasonably feasible and where we anticipate impacts greater than added grading for the ditch section. Those areas that are shown in magenta are potential higher impact areas. Along the 5+ miles of the corridor, approximately 75% will need mitigation beyond simple grading to accommodate the 5-foot shoulder and clear zone area. Mitigation options include enhanced grading and tree clearing. The clear zone, which the title characterizes, is a 10-foot area outside the travel lane that is clear of obstacles such as trees and is flat enough to allow a driver to come to a safe stop or steer back onto the road. The second mitigation option is providing retaining wall to reduce the amount of dirt and rock that may need to be removed to create the clear zone. As there is considerable grade to the terrain moving away from the highway, the impact area of grading only to provide the clear zone results in substantial impacts. By constructing a retaining wall, the amount of grading outside the clear zone can be dramatically reduced. A third key mitigation alternative is providing guardrail or a creekside retaining wall, which are designed to reduce the impact of a crash when adequate clear zone is not feasible. In the US 14A corridor, a good example of where a guardrail or retaining wall on the creekside is needed is where Spearfish Creek is close enough to the road and the terrain on the other side of the road is very steep and is essentially rock and not soil. In these situations, guardrail or a retaining wall would be used to provide a safety barrier between the road and the creek, as providing an adequate clear zone may not be feasible. For much of the length needing mitigation to accommodate the clear zone, a combination of the options described are needed due to the proximity of Spearfish Creek and the severe terrain on the side opposite the creek. While providing a 10-foot clear zone drives the need for enhanced mitigation through much of the corridor, the 5-foot shoulder influences the type of mitigation recommended. In most situations, enhanced grading and clearing will be the lowest cost alternative. The proposed concept is to provide a 5-foot shoulder. However, a 3-foot shoulder is allowed based on South Dakota DOT design guidelines. As we are in the study phase on the overall project, an impact comparison between the mitigation options available for a 5-foot and a 3-foot shoulder were reviewed. The primary differences were a 3-foot shoulder, with the 3-foot shoulder, approximately 3 miles of higher cost mitigation, such as retaining wall, could be addressed through lower cost enhanced grading or clearing for the clear zone. A 3-foot shoulder, with a 3-foot shoulder, many areas of assumed retaining wall could be eliminated. With a narrower cross section, approximately 1 mile of 5 to 10 foot high retaining wall and 1 mile of 0 to 5 foot high walls could be eliminated. Smaller increments of just short of 0.2 of a mile would come from mitigation, guardrail, and retaining wall combination, or just guardrail respectively, that could be eliminated. As stated earlier, mixing 5-foot and 3-foot shoulder width sections result in undesirable driver expectation conditions and would not be recommended. Thus, as recommendations are prepared for the technical analysis and input received through this meeting, a consistent shoulder width would be proposed. Higher numbers of crashes have been observed between Elmore Road and Shone Lane. Options considered to address the higher crash experience include increasing the radius of the curves and adding shoulder. Realigning the curve results in shifting the road just over 20 feet, which results in substantial impacts to the adjacent property. As most of the crashes observed involve vehicles running off the road, adding shoulder width is also a positive mitigation. South Dakota DOT staff considered the adjacent area impacts of realignment to be too severe. Thus, the proposal is to retain the add shoulder and improve options for review. An initial environmental scan has been completed to understand current environmental resources that could be impacted by the proposed improvements and set the stage for future environmental analysis and clearance processes. Resources present along the corridor include wetlands, potential historical structures, national forest and tribal lands, and visual resources. The identified corridor improvement alternatives were reviewed relative to the current using the following criteria. Context consistency, which we have defined as how well the improvements support the identified vision of the corridor, which for this corridor is to support destination access travel. Level of consistency with South Dakota DOT highway design guidelines. Going into the study, there was the expectation the proposed improvements might not meet all of the design criteria in order to reduce the impacts on the unique surroundings. The degree of impacts of proposed changes on the surrounding natural and public and private property abutting the corridor was another evaluation criterion. And the final was cost. As there are a number of corridors addressed to this study, a cost per mile estimate was developed to provide the South Dakota DOT with consistent information they can use to assess side-by-side concepts relative to their budget and also for developing a timing plan for improvements. Key takeaways from the alternatives review include: 1, providing a 10-foot clear zone is the primary influencer of mitigation impact areas and cost. There are cost differences between providing a 3-foot and a 5-foot shoulder with a clear zone impact cost. However, the 10-foot buffer outside the travel lane is consistent between the alternatives. Moving the roadway far enough away from Spearfish Creek to eliminate the need for guardrail and/or retaining wall to protect the creek and the road is difficult. South Dakota DOT would prefer to minimize the new infrastructure added to the corridor to retain the views from the road present today and to reduce maintenance cost. Terrain on the opposite side from the creek severely restricts the feasibility of moving the road in that direction. And finally, accepting a 3-foot shoulder will reduce construction costs over the 5-foot shoulder, as 3 miles of retaining wall can be replaced with grading, which is lower cost. Additionally, the amount of higher retaining wall can be reduced, which also reflects a cost savings. Thank you for viewing the presentation. To learn more about Corridor 2, click the orange Get Started button now, located below this video. This will take you to the overall corridor location map. By pressing and holding the left mouse button, you can move to the corridor of most interest to you. A quick mouse click while hovering over Corridor 2 will take you to more detailed information. These instructions are repeated by clicking the About icon located in the gray ribbon along the left side of your screen. The corridors icon is also located in the gray ribbon, allows you to quickly navigate between the corridors. Once you reach the detailed information, please click on the dash boxes to provide feedback. We look forward to hearing from you.